Fundamentals of Lute Playing. My name is Laudon Schuett, and today we're going to be talking about bars. If I had to think of a single technique that has perhaps caused the most duress to the most number of students that I've taught over the years, it is bars. Talking to other instructors, I find that this is also true. Often students will give up, mostly adult students, because they're able to give up. The younger students tend to get through it because their parents have paid for the lessons and they've got to do the lessons. It's one of those techniques that I think until you master it, it's really, really, really challenging. It can be very mentally taxing, and that once you do master it, it makes so much easier. And I think that's the sad irony of it, is that if you're not doing bars well, it's you're constantly trying to avoid them. They perhaps are causing pain on the inside of your hand, the back of your wrist, and things like that. And then once you learn how to do bar and you learn how to do it really well, it's such a great way to avoid doing awkward fingerings. It allows you to do so much more on the fingerboard. This is going to be part one of bars. Today we're just going to cover the basic bar, which is using the left hand or right hand, I guess if you're left-handed and you're playing with the instrument the other way. It'll be the first finger bar. I will do a part two where I'll cover partial bars, hinge bars, and then some other really fancy things like cross fret bars and bars with alternate fingers, so using 4, 3, and 2 as bar possibilities. But for today, we're just going to cover sort of the basics of how to do a good bar. Now, I've been doing bars since I was 11 years old. So one of the things that I have noticed that has happened to me over the years is that because it hasn't been challenging for a really long time, I think I kind of got it worked out when I was like 12 or 13, you sort of forget how rough it can be in the beginning. And I'm going to try to keep that in mind as we go. You'll hear all sorts of things about bars. You'll hear people say, oh, you have to lay your finger down absolutely straight and as close to the fret as possible. And then other people will say, oh, you have to lean your finger back and you have to tilt it so it doesn't use the little creases in your finger. They don't get right on the string. And then they'll say, oh, you have to work out and you have to have good arm strength and all of this. Yeah, maybe in some situations, but I found that you really need to be able to do a bar almost under any condition. And one of the things I'm going to demonstrate to you is that actually, I think people, if you were to put together all of the problems people have with bars, I think they can kind of fit under a single description, which is that have found in all my teaching that the number one reason people fail at the bar is they're not putting pressure in the correct place. And when you're not putting pressure in the correct place, you think, oh, I need more pressure, and you add more and more pressure. And I think people end up really squeezing very hard. One of the other mistakes that people make is they think that they think that the bar is like one of these. Now, this is a capo. It's not really going to fit on the lute here. But if you're a guitar player, you know the capo. And the wonderful thing with the capo is you snap it on and you forget about it. You play the strings and all of that. And so I will also notice that students will put their finger down and they just want to be able to forget about the finger. And then they end up with this kind of stuff. So what I've found is that in order to do bars really, really well and to have them feel good as you play them, you need to have a remarkably accurate roadmap of your finger. And you need to think of every point on your finger that comes in touch with a string, a course or a string. Lutes add a little bit of an extra. You have to make sure you get the whole course instead of just one string on the course, versus guitar. So you have to have a really good body awareness of that, and then to apply the pressure where it's needed. And we'll go into that in more detail. But I will show you, people tend to think that you need a lot of pressure to make a bar work. But let me show you something. I'm going to do a bar without the thumb. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my finger down, and I'm just going to go through. that? And I've got my fingers nice and relaxed. Everything's nice. That's a bar. And I can move that around. Little adjustment on that fourth course. Which is kind of neat. Now that doesn't mean that I normally play without the thumb on the back. I do put the thumb on the back, and I do put a little bit of pressure from that thumb, but it's a very, very tiny amount of pressure. And what I'm just trying to show is that the vice grip that I see so many students do, they're gonna, to make the bar work, it's just not necessary. You don't have to do it. So you can actually do bars very comfortably even without the thumb. Not that I'm saying that you would do that regularly. It's even easier when you add the thumb on, but I want to show that it's possible. So let's talk about some basics, the practicals. How do we actually make bars easier? Step one is sitting position. If you do not have a comfortable sitting position, I highly recommend going back and watching the video that I did earlier on sitting positions. Having a sitting position where you can really control the instrument. Right now I'm in a sort of adjusted classical guitar position, but really what I'm trying to imitate is what they talk about in the sources, which is pushing the lute up against a table and just being in a very comfortable control with the lute in front of me. Other positions I talk about in the video are cross-legged, the footstool on the other side. It doesn't matter to me what sitting position you pick, but just make sure that you've got control of the instrument, that it's not flying around and it's not very loose, because the looser the instrument is, the more difficult it is going to be to do bars. So go back and review that video if you haven't found a good sitting position. So you've got your good sitting position. Now, one of the other things to think about is that one of the most common injuries I see from bars is people getting pain here, and then sometimes a little less often on the back of the hand, but mostly here in the thumb, and then after that it spreads. Now that just comes from the thumb squeezing too hard because you're trying to give yourself the counterweight against the bar being pressed down. So they're squeezing here, and then that's getting tense, and they're doing it for long periods of time, and it's starting to hurt. Now, if you think about it, your thumb, even though it's the biggest digit on your hand, it's kind of little. This is this little thing, and it's going to be overpowered by your arm. It's going to be overpowered by this bar that you're pushing down, because your whole arm is sort of involved in the bar pushing down, and your thumb's going to lose. So you need a different counterweight, or I'd say at least 90% of the counterweight should come from a different source. And like I said before, you can play without the thumb. You know, you can do anywhere you want on the fingerboard. You can take the thumb off, and you can make it even easier by just adding a little bit of thumb. But where is that counter pressure coming from? It's coming from the other arm. So what I'm just doing is I'm making sure that the other arm is holding the instrument securely. I'm not, doing anything really crazy with it. I'm just holding it securely. And then that's forming the counterweight. And I'm taking my thumb off just to prove that I'm not squeezing with my thumb. And I should say I chose deliberately slippery pants today to show, even with like slippery pants and just the minimal liner on here, you can make it work. So ideally, you're going to be providing about 80 to 90% of the counter pressure from your other arm. So it's going to be like a teeter-totter. So this pushes down, this is the counterweight. And then maybe another 5 to 10% from your thumb, and that's just to make sure that you're not squeezing too hard with this arm. It's just to make life a little bit easier. So work on kind of that feel as you're doing all the things that I'm talking about from here on. Keep it in mind. If you find yourself squeezing with the thumb, take the thumb off. Try to do it without the thumb and use the arm as the counterweight. It's absolutely possible. It might take a little bit of practice and thinking. So you've got your setup, you've got an idea of kind of where your counterweight is coming from. how do we go about this on a practical level? And what I do is I probably set aside some time. This is not something you need to do for the rest of your life. It's not something you even need to do 6 months from now, but maybe take a little time in your practice session where you just meditate on bars. And what I would do is I would find a nice, easy position on the fingerboard, maybe something that doesn't put your arm way out, but maybe closer, like the fifth fret. And I would start with maybe two strings. And what you're doing is, and this I did this as a kid a lot, is you're putting your finger down like this. And some of us have flexible tip joints and some of us don't. You'll have to kind of, if you have a flexible tip joint, you may find that you need to do this sort of thing when you're playing a small number of strings. You see where the knuckle actually comes up. If you don't have a flexible tip joint, you may find that you can just keep it flat. Mine is flexible, so I have to do that. So don't feel like you need to copy me if you see that. Your finger may be a little bit different. So you're going to cover two strings. And what I used to do is I used to like close my eyes and I would just picture where one string was and I'd apply the pressure there. And then I should say course. I've been teaching a lot of guitar lately, so it's where the right course is. Just going and I'm trying that to try each. And technically you should be able to put pressure on one and then not on the other. So being able to control where that pressure is on your fingertip. And you just do this on two strings. And once you've got a really clean, you'll notice I've got my eyes closed because I'm really thinking about creating a mental map of where these strings touch my finger. And you'll say, well, but it's going to be different with every bar. Yes, it's going to be. But as you practice, it'll be easier and easier to sort of form the map in your mind. And once you've got the map in your mind, you know where you can put that pressure. And then what I'll do, generally it's harder going this way than this way, though there are some exceptions. For example, if you're doing a full bar as you go up, the middle strings are a little harder to keep down. But in general, bars are harder going this way. So what I might want to do is get this really comfortable and be able to go. And I'm doing everything like super fast. You may need to spend a couple days on just this. But I'm just kind of showing you the process. So we're taking two strings and eventually you're making your way down here. And if you're worried about up here, you could go all the way up here. You can even go above the fingerboard, or I should say above the onto the soundboard. And you're just going along. Oh, and you'll notice I don't even have a thumb on the back while doing that. And then you're going to do three strings. And what might happen is you might do something like this. And you go, ah! And what you need to do is freeze. Because I notice that most people, their first reaction when something like that happens is they squeeze. And they're like, I just need more pressure. You don't need more pressure. You need to put pressure in the right spot. And so what you're working on is accuracy. When you're doing bars, think of yourself as like an archer and not like a tavern brawler or something like that, or a fighter or something like that. You're an archer and you're really trying to just hone in on that spot. And it's going to be the same situation, right? And you could do it with the thumb off the back, or you can do it with the thumb on the back. Doesn't matter. And I think it's pretty clear what happens next. Then you do four. And one little game I like to play, especially as you get more strings, is you can randomly play a string. 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 3. Go through and see if you can name and try to put the pressure where it's needed. So you may have the whole bar down and it might be tempting to just squeeze down on everything. But one fun game that I like to play, which will help prepare you for things that show up in pieces, is to just find that string that you need. So if I just need the second string, but I don't need 4, that's fine. And I don't really need 3. And I might be getting one just because it happens to be grabbed, but I'm not really going for it. So being able to select those notes, and you're just going to do this all the way until you can do 6 courses. And you can do it without the thumb on the back. And I find that when you take the thumb off, you just add a little extra with the arm, but not much. Some things to watch out for. While you're doing this exercise, watch out for this. Don't let the fingers extend out. Pretty soon in the next little exercise I'm going to give you, you're not going to just have these hanging out. You're going to be using them. So they're not much use out there, and it adds tension. So keep them relaxed, keep them curled. And I think that'll be very, very beneficial as you go along. Now, once you can do that very smoothly, you've just got that one finger, and you can basically do a bar wherever you want. You're in good shape. One other thing, people tend to get really obsessed with where the thumb is located on the left hand. And what people say, oh, it has to be right where the middle finger is. It has to be just a little bit to the left. It has to be a little bit crossed over. I think everyone's physiology is a little different. There's kind of a happy zone. And I really think that you need to find where it's comfortable. And that's a dangerous thing to say maybe to a beginning student, because it might be comfortable in the moment, but it maybe causes trouble down the road. So what I would say is, there's a pretty good range, which is sort of from the middle finger, maybe a little bit back this way. That is good. I think if you start crossing over too far with your thumb, then you end up getting kind of tense there. So I would aim for somewhere around your first and second finger to possibly a little farther back, especially if large hands. If you got really big hands, I found that people tend to go a little more this way with their thumb. That's the sort of thing that I'd work individually with a student to work out. If you were one of my students, we spend a little time to figure out where is the best spot for that thumb. There isn't really a one size fits all. Now, bars are very, very rarely played just as a strict bar. I mean, you may have a situation like this where you have a bar and then a note that comes down afterwards, but you're almost always involving other fingers. And that actually is when things get pretty complicated, because I find that sometimes students, they're doing just fine when they're playing each of the individual strings. But as soon as you add other fingers, things get really, really nasty. So what I would do is I'd go back to using 2 strings, and I would maybe just play the bar, and then maybe a simple pattern, like something like, and then end with the bar at the end. So I'm playing the bar, 2, 3, 4, bar, and then do it on the second string. I played that a second time. Let me explain why. The first time I did that, I accidentally cut off the first course, and I want that to keep ringing. So when we hit the bar, we want the string that we're not moving fingers on to continue ringing out. Okay? And you'll do this up and down the neck just like you did before, and then you'll do 3 strings. And such and such and such. And you do it all the way till you have all 6. And then you play, you could choose which strings to play when you're covering 6, or you could strum. And I think the next little variation on that is to sort of do a finger exercise where you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 3, 4. It doesn't matter what you pick. It doesn't really matter. Just pick a little pattern. And what you're going to do is you do it on 1 string, and then when you change strings, you put the pressure just where it's needed. And again, you can do this without the thumb on the back. And you're just getting used to. While I was doing that, just to be clear, I was not holding down on all six strings. I was only pressing where I needed to press when it arose. Um, and I think once you've done that and you start getting more and more comfortable with those sort of things, um, it gets a lot easier. Let me give you one other little game you can play that I sometimes like to throw at students just to make sure they're really on top of their game. And then we'll talk about maybe what you'll see in the music that you're playing, in the Renaissance music you're playing. So one final little game for you to try out is you put a bar down, but you don't press. So I've just got my finger lying on the strings. And then I call out two strings. And so let's say 6 and 3. And I'm really only trying to press on 6 and 3. You might get a little bit of maybe 2, for example, or maybe a little bit of 1, but you're just focusing in on those two strings. And then I might try, okay, 4 and 1. And you're just seeing where you're not pressing it. So it's just a variation on that game from before, which is getting two notes at the same time. Then I think it's really time. Again, I'm not a person who likes to spend ages on these sort of mindless, unmusical. I didn't say mindless. You're thinking very carefully as you're doing these, but they're not musical, right? These are just sort of patterns that we're doing. So then I would find a piece or a phrase that you're playing. It could be something with A minor or something like that, and take a look at a chord that has a bar and figure out, well, where do you actually need to press? Now, if I'm playing this A minor, but I'm only playing the sixth course, the third, the second, and the first, and the third course has the second finger down, I really only need to press down on 3 strings, 6, 2, 1. And so I'm going like that. Now, if I were to play the fourth or the fifth, it's not really clean because I'm not really pushing down on those strings. I'm just pushing, and I'm not pushing down on the third because the second finger is there. And for those of you who are maybe absolute beginners, just so you know, it's just where you're pushing closest to the sound hole. So 2, if you were to press down behind that second finger, behind 2, it wouldn't add anything to it. So it's not worth doing. So you're really just pushing down on 6, 2, and 1. And so what we want to make sure is that's where we're pushing. And you can play the chord all together. And then what I like to do is play them separately. And then once you've got that really clean and comfortable, and again, you can take the thumb off if you want. I want to say there was a point when I was about 14, I think it was when I was first starting classical guitar at the local community college with Chuck Houlihan in Arizona. And I think my first semester there, I came in and I didn't have the thumb on the back. And he said, "Oh, where did you hear that?" And I think it was some article about Segovia not playing with his thumb on the back. And I don't know if I even read it correctly as a kid, but I learned like a whole Bach prelude without the thumb on the back. I think it was BWV 999. So, it is a helpful thing to do maybe for a period of time before you bring the thumb back in. So when we play this chord, let's say we've got our A minor chord, and then we just need to use our ears and make sure that we keep things ringing while we're playing the other things. So if I were to boil down everything into some tips. So tip number 1, find a good sitting position. A good, stable sitting position to deal with your bars. If you're doing this, if you're doing, with just a strap on and your lute's moving around a lot, it's going to make it a lot harder. It's not impossible. You can certainly, work it out. I can do a bar, I think, like that. Yeah. I don't know if I could do it without the thumb there. That would be really hard if it were floating up in the air like that. So, stable sitting position. Number 2, most of the counterweight comes from the arm here, like a teeter-totter, right? You're pushing here, and that's the counterweight for your finger pushing down here, and maybe 10%, 15% is coming from the thumb. And then it's about accuracy. It's about building that mental map and pushing where you actually need to push. If you are squeezing really, really, really hard, let's say you're playing this A minor chord and you're getting a something like that, and you're getting a bad sound, and you just go, ah, almost, I mean, I want to say every time I've seen a student do this, all they end up doing is pushing harder into a note that they already had or into a note they don't need. You know, the fourth string or maybe the third string or something like that. So if you find yourself squeezing, you have to pause and think. Close your eyes, picture where your finger is touching the strings and put the pressure in the correct place. That's it. 3 points of contact. That fourth note covered by the second string. And you know, oftentimes you'll have something like a chord like this, where there's only like two notes that need to be covered by the bar. So you can almost even have like almost a little arch when you're doing that. So that takes a while to build up. That ability to just picture in your mind's eye where you need to put the pressure. And I had to relearn it for the lute. I do think the lute is harder to do this because of the courses than a guitar. The single string is easier. I'll find sometimes I'll get like one string out of a course, but not the other string out of a course. And there's a Caparola Pavana that just, I think it's something like this, where it's just a bar through the whole piece. And it was just so hard for me when I switched from guitar to lute. I was like, why aren't my bars working? And you just have to rework it. So if you're a guitar player and you're an experienced guitar player and you've never had it, or you haven't had issues with bars for a long time, you may need to rework for the lute. But it's really a mental game. It's really a mental game, and I don't know how often people don't believe me. They'll say, "Oh, you know, my finger is too weak," or, you know, my hands are weak, or my hands are shaped weird. No, they're not. I mean, unless you genuinely are like missing a finger. I had a student once who, a wonderful, wonderful student, and he was born missing a bone in one of his fingers. Now, to his credit, he never complained once, and he actually could do some really, really cool things. We found some alternate fingerings and stuff like that. And so I'll tell students, like, do you still have the finger? Yeah. Is it still moving? You know, do you have a diagnosis from a doctor with some weird neurological thing? And if you're within the normal range, you should be able to do this. If you're not, if you do have a condition that genuinely prevents you or makes it more difficult to do bars, well, then you adjust the music just like they would have done under different circumstances. There are ways to remove bars. You can thin chords out and stuff like that. I'm not a big fan of being inflexible. I like the idea everybody should be able to play the music, even if we need to make some adjustments. I mean, you could even turn it into a duet and play it with a friend. So if any of you have any questions, I know that this is sort of a controversial topic. Everybody has their thing about bars. If anybody has any questions, please put it in the comments. But I do genuinely stand behind what I have to say, which is I don't think there's a cheap trick to making bars work. I think if you really want a flexible, powerful bar that is going to work for you in many different circumstances, it's about building that mental connection, that roadmap of the finger, and knowing exactly where your finger is touching the string and where to push. And this is going to be really, really apparent when we start doing things like cross fret bars. So I've got my first finger, you know, I've got the tip of my finger here, for example, on the fourth fret, and I've got the base of my finger grabbing those. Let's see. So if I wanted to get 3, I'd have to put it back a little bit like that. But I'm getting 2 and 1 and 6 there. You could do, it'll become an issue when we talk about doing alternate finger bars. So like pinky, like this. It'll be an interesting, this idea of being very relaxed will be super helpful when doing hinge bars, both going into the bar and coming out. and that'll be in the second video on bars, which I'll probably do in a couple weeks. So if you're enjoying these lessons, please consider subscribing. It helps my channel out. If you really like them and you want to do a little more support, I am putting my Patreon link in the description, so you're welcome to go there. I'm always very appreciative of that. I'll be hopefully in the second cycle of the series making some upgrades to the video and all of that. But happy practicing. Good luck with the bars. Really, if you have any questions or concerns, put them in the comment section and I'll do my best to respond as soon as possible. Have a wonderful day.